start here. As soon as this tells me we're streaming. I believe we are up. And rookie mistake, I forgot to mute my external monitor. Good morning, everybody. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am making it up as I go along, as usual.
Uh-huh.
But enjoy. What's your jersey? What team is that?
The St. Louis Blues.
St. Louis Blues. Nice. Excellent.
I'm more of a Montreal Canadien kind of guy, but fate put me here, so I wear the hockey of the local people here. So
When in Rome, as they say.
when in Rome, exactly. So
Well, today on Close the Distance, Eric and I, and Monica, if she joins us, will be talking about the narrative industrial complex, which you've all grown very familiar with over the last probably 50 years. But in particular, the last 21 months or so, I think we've seen it on display there. And we're calling this Defenestrating the narrative industrial complex because it shouldn't be very much fun for them. We talked about how are we deflowering or defenestrating, and Eric said deflowering can actually be enjoyable. So let's not call it that. I think is how you explained it. But my name is Eric Johnson. I'm the founder and chairman of Aurora Worldwide Development Corporation, and I started this thing last year. I won't talk about that much more, but this thing is going to live on a site called Open Recon, and Open Recon is where we're going to build a lot of the members only sort of behind the scenes stuff. So feel free to follow us on all the socials and whatnot. We'll be streaming in all those places soon. Eric, before you go into your musical melody, or maybe this is part of your introduction, I'll just shut up and let you do it.
I'm a bass player who collects strategic intelligence trends. That's
I like
it. That's my intro.
We need you to.
I don't have a license for. Technically, I don't have a license for either.
Indeed, we need you to do the theme song behind the scenes, or maybe we just have you do it live. It's something new every time.
Maybe we can, sort of like the Seinfeld. Except that was a keyboard bass doing a slap bass patch that he had. It was a synth. It wasn't really bass. But anyway, I can do that. But are we going to throw the media into the garbage this morning or what?
Well, the media and the masters they serve, I think, is probably the where we were going with that. The topic here is really driven by a couple of days ago, and pardon my dogs in the background. My wife is coming home from dropping the kids at school, and they think she's an enemy until they discover when she walks through the door that she's not.
You've had them a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I know. It's like
they've met her, have they not?
every day is a new, exciting new. Well, you had an encounter with Freya actually last time you stayed at our house, and you were giving Tina a hug on your way out. I think she bit you on the ankle and drew blood, didn't she?
I was not going to be the first to put any insurance-based information into this. I forget, frankly.
She bit you pretty hard on the ankle when you were giving my wife a hug. So that's. We have two poodles. One's a standard, and he's a sweetie. But Freya's a badass. She's the baddest motherfucker from the junkyard. And by the way, this is a family show. We try and reserve the F words until after 9 a.m. When we've all woken up a little bit. But pardon my invocation of profanity there. Eric, feel free to balance the scales.
That's about 5.5 inches tall of a junkyard dog right there. No F-bombs necessary. Just this is true.
So Freya's a Yorkie poo, and Yorkie poos are half Yorkshire Terrier, half teacup poodle, and they were bred as ratters. Her breeding is to climb up a water pipe, slaughter a rat, and drag it back to her master. So she is a bad motherfucker.
That sounds like that's intelligence dog right there. Like
exactly.
Crawl up into the hole, take all the stuff, and get it out.
Climb into a really uncomfortable place, kill something, and bring it back. that's kind of what we do, right? We go into really uncomfortable environments, we slaughter something, and we bring it back to
We
magic.
don't care what it smells. We don't care what it smells like.
I like that. Freya's officially the mascot of this show. I'll have her on sometime when I leave the bedroom door open. Well, here we are.
I hereby forgive blood that one time.
The bloodletting is forgiven, Freya. So it's January 4th, Tuesday, January 4th. It's about 8:41 here in southern Wisconsin. I'm just south of Madison. Eric's in St. Louis. And we're a couple of intelligence guys who sit around and talk about what's going on and where it might take us in the future. We help our clients to interpret reality based on our observations and insights. We see with different eyes than the average observer does, I think is fair to say. We don't take narrative as truth. I think that's an important sort of place for us to start. And there's a whole lot of narrative that has been shared, I won't say just since the pandemic, there's a whole lot of narrative in the last many years, which are designed to manipulate rather than to inform. There's my
Mr. Johnson. You two things. One, in my world of futures, we rely heavily on narrative. So we can't slam all narrative because children, the average neurotypical child can't get to an analytical composition of a story until about age 8 or 9, where they can, for example, ask a child describe the parts of a dog. They can't do that till about age 8 or 9. But ask them to tell you a story about a dog. Oh, well, grandma has a doggy, and we go over to grandma's and we see a doggy. That's age 2. So it's much more primeval, the ability for us to tell stories. It starts really super early. So you can't be into analytics before you're into narrative. So we can't slime narrative here. And as far as false narrative, I cannot let you, just go at the pandemic thing, though. There's a whole bunch there that I got some questions about. But, for example, have you ever heard the narrative that Napoleon Bonaparte was short? I had his hand tucked. Remember that? Yeah. You know how tall he was?
I have no idea.
5'7".
Huh.
He was an average height for an adult male of his era, given access to the amount of protein that was relatively available in Corsica or France. I know, you're a Nordic person, you're a Viking, and you grow the big people that used to rob the monasteries. We know this. The lower continent, right? The lower continent, 5'7" was a completely average age. That was British disinformation. The narrative about Napoleon being short and the Napoleonic complex was complete disinformation.
Wow.
Pre-Russian intelligence, the gold standards in disinfo. But the British had a great sense of it. So they made him short, but he was not. He was just really good at kicking the crap out of everyone in Europe. So they're like, he's short and the ladies think so, which was pretty weak.
Yep. Well, that's, the nature of propaganda against your enemy is that you must make them repellent to those you want to influence, right? You have to character assassinate in order for the desired influence group to be repelled by them.
That's right. It makes it
about Napoleon.
I'm all about new information. That's what I do. It's intelligence. But I love collecting stories where people are wrong. By the way, I have another one. Speaking of narrative, it's about I whipped this one out on Napoleon when it comes to inaccurate technology forecasting. I have a whole keynote speech called "Bad Forecasts," trying to humble people into understanding that their perception of the future may not be accurate. And probably there's not as great a military R&D futurist as Napoleon Bonaparte. He established veterans hospitals in France, the School for Mines and Bridges. He is the Army, basically the Army War College and Army R&D, the use of engineers in the Army. He invented all that. But another thing, it's an accurate quote. I believe it was Fulton presented him with the concept of the steamship, and he said, "Are you telling me I'm going to light a fire on a ship intentionally? Get out of my office. You're insane." You know, we all miss sometimes. So Napoleon was probably the greatest innovator of our research and development. He established the DARPA of its time in the French military. But he couldn't get his head around burning coal to turn a turbine, to turn a paddle on a ship, so that you didn't have to worry about where the wind was coming from. You could turn into it.
Yeah.
He was like, that's nonsense. That was a narrative he could not get on with, because he's like, you don't set fires on a ship.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know.
Well,
narrative.
So one of the things that just happened in the last couple days that I won't spend an inordinate amount of time on here today with you, and I wish Monica was here as well, because she's got some strong thoughts on this. Joe Rogan. She has strong thoughts on everything. Well, that's true. Yeah. Joe Rogan had a gentleman named Robert Malone on his podcast a couple days ago. I don't know if you're familiar with him. You're probably familiar with Joe Rogan, I'm guessing, but you know, he's got an audience of 50 or 60 million people who, you know, listen. It's probably 20 times the size of the next largest audience, which is probably Tucker Carlson, I'm guessing, and that whole cadre in the, you know. So if more people are watching him than us, I gotta say, I doubt that. But go on. You might be surprised to discover, more people are watching Joe Rogan than us right now. And he had on a guy named Robert Malone. Now, I first discovered Robert Malone on the Dark Horse podcast, which is Brett Weinstein, and his wife, Heather Haying is her name. And Brett had Robert Malone, another guy, and another guy. I forget the other guys. But Robert Malone stood out to me because he is one of the inventors of mRNA-based vaccines. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, when this was a completely unheard of subject, he was one of the innovators behind that technology. Not the only one. He has been, I'll say, slandered in the last several months by saying that he was an inventor of those vaccines, but I saved the screenshots of his Wikipedia page, which is what you have to do now when you have someone who emerges with a counter narrative. And his counter narrative was mass vaccination is not the right strategy for dealing with the pandemic. As one of the inventors of mRNA-based vaccine technology, it's not the way out of this. And immediately, because that counter narrative was disruptive to the official narrative, they started character assassinating poor Dr. Malone. And seems like the sweetest guy in the world. I don't know him, but my wife follows him, very religiously, and she's learned a lot about his personal life. He raises horses, and he's just a very soft-spoken guy, and very, very authoritative. But he can't get anybody but the Epic Times to cover him. And so, of course, what do you think when you hear
very interesting
Falun Gong? They're the Falun Gong guys who, basically they're the counter narrative to the Chinese Communist Party. So I'll leave it there, but that's the thing that sort of brought this topic to mind around, the narrative industrial complex. Is there's no way Dr. Robert Malone, MD, will be allowed to have a voice in this, because he's not saying anything correct about what the official narrative is until Joe effing Rogan puts him on to his 50 or 60 million podcast listeners.
All right. So, first of all, I want to stress to the audience that I got a new set of skills against my will starting in late 2016 when I came out with an opinion that was really anodyne, really quotidian, which is to say, those are fancy words. That means this shouldn't have been up for debate. This was everyday information. There's this country called Russia, and they do Russia stuff, which is they have an intelligence service, and they tend to monkey around in people's elections. They do this everywhere. Thailand, Mexico, Argentina. They've done this for 100 years. And the guy in charge of the country is a former KGB dude who was stationed in East Germany, right? And I said, hey, so we just got this guy Trump elected. There's some Russians up in here. But if you go back to that particular narrative, the counter narrative that I presented, it looks tame compared to the Mueller report, to what we've learned since, to learning about Russia's influence in Catalonian independence, or their support of Viktor Orban in Hungary, or whatever. I didn't go that far, and I didn't get into the fact that we had people monkeying around in the 2020 election. We had Hezbollah up in there. I was like, wow, that's a little gang that could. Wow, Iran. I think there was some Venezuela that got reported. That people have got some interest in us going a certain direction. I just said Russia. Russia was the most obvious choice. And I barely, relative to nothing, I barely whispered it. And I only had 5,000 followers on Twitter when I did. And this whole machine went into operation and came out and started attacking. And it was fascinating because this was not, and I got called a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, I think you can look up on, you don't need a security clearance or anything to figure out that Russia has been messing around in some elections. That wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't part of the narrative right then, at that moment. And so watching this machine go into place, and it was not 24 hours. I think Daily.News came out, and I forget their take on it. I remember Gizmodo, which I then tracked who owned it. It went back to Univision and I think Haim Saban and some private equity money there. But Jezebel, owned by Gizmodo, came out with Stop Man-Threading. Because there was this concept called man-spreading, where apparently men sit with their knees apart and take up space on public transit.
Yeah.
Had you heard of that, sir?
I've heard of it. I've never done it because I don't take public transit ever, because I don't really travel anymore since the pandemic. But yeah.
But you've heard of manspreading?
I have, yes.
Okay, manspreading. So you take up, if you spread onto two seats, or you push your knees apart, that's known as manspreading. Jezebel, which is owned by Gizmodo Media, immediately, like second day after this thread, said, people stop man-threading, because I had replied to myself 126 times, making a 127 tweet thread, and it said, stop man-threading, because you're taking up the internet. Now, practically, the number of packets that travel over the internet and the number of tweets per day on Twitter in Brunei, South Korea, El Salvador, Canada, the United States, many more than 127. But this media outlet, paid for by these very interesting people, decided that they were going to they used their property called Jezebel, which is supposedly a feminist-y kind of outlet. They decided that I was spreading too much. The narrative was too much testosterone on the internet. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I don't know why that would. And now the interesting thing, Eric, was my thread before that was upbraiding the media for highlighting the role of Hillary Clinton's gender. So my previous thread had been about misogyny. My next one was about Russia, and then this feminist outlet said, stop man threading, and I engaged on Twitter. I engaged Alina Hope Levinson, who was the author, and I said, I hope you don't mind me threading, because my last thread before that was about misogyny, and I believe her very professional comment was, "LOL, you do you." Send. That was a professional. That was a nice professional exchange right there.
Yeah.
And then 2 days after that, Slate got into the mix with a guy named Sam Criss, who is British and worked for a leftist, or worked with a leftist named Jeremy Corbyn, who has a very interesting, history throughout the Cold War, about how this was the worst piece of political writing ever, and it was done with me. He imputed a mix of mental illness and drug addiction to the whole thing, and he said it was the worst piece of political writing in history, which I thought was wild, because it's like, wow, that means it's worse than Hitler's Mein Kampf, which is pretty cool on some level. I almost kind of like, I'm like, wow, like I topped Hitler, like nice. This engine went into place, and it stayed in place for years. About 2019, after Robert Mueller came out and just started laying out some facts that were, hit up by documentary evidence, that mostly stopped. But for 2 years, there was a narrative, and none of it had to do with fact. It was just, it was tens of thousands of words in billion-dollar companies that came out about little old me, right? Who working out of here, and it was just so very interesting that I asked an expert in public relations. I said, okay, this was about the time I had about somewhere between 70 and 100 major media pieces that had been written about me. And I said, how much would this cost if you were a PR guy? And my colleague said, 10 million plus a cash slush fund for illegal acts and every single favor you were owed in the industry. In fact, I'm not even sure that's accurate. I don't know how you'd make this happen. But so there was like an engine that went into place. This is what this means. You are not allowed to look at foreign interference in the U.S. election. And I think in the 5 years since all of that, Russia was not nearly as interesting as maybe Israel and its role, or Iran, or North Korea, and finance, or like the microfinance that went into different candidates, social media efforts. There was a lot to learn there, but I think the message was certainly clear to me, but it might be clear to anyone else who dared get into the topic. This thing that I'm sorry, I don't feel this is a conspiracy theory, because I have spreadsheets, and I've done syntax analysis of the number of the word combinations and where they matched across multiple of these dozens and dozens of articles just in the first year and a half. And the timing and the relationships of the word combos, it suggests an organized principle somewhere. Now, who ordered it, I don't know. Did someone order it? I don't know, but I'm told it's very difficult to make that many words show up in that order that many times. And if nothing else, I guess, you could apply this to the housing bubble, September 11th. You could apply it to our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or really anything that there is a machine that kicks up a narrative. There are also machines that kick up counter narratives. And one of the things I've learned as an adjunct to my intelligence skills that I had, and by the way, you're not much of an intel expert if you know that Russia monkeys around in politics. That's just, you had to have heard of Comintern, which is the communist international effort to spread the workers' paradise all over the place. They cut it out during Stalin because it was too obvious that they were trying to mess with people's elections. But that's Wikipedia level intel. That's not, you need a security clearance, right?
Yep.
I have had to acquire a lot more understanding of disinformation and misinformation from a military science perspective of, okay, how is this done? At first they started with me, right? So, this is purely selfish. I'm sitting here going, You sure have organized a lot of people to write about me, and I am boring right now. But apparently you're really nervous about what I'm writing about, which is not that interesting yet. So how is this done? And I've worked with experts since then, and it's funny you bring up like Joe Rogan's podcast. There are a lot of guests that he has that I don't find very reliable or useful at all. But you start finding out that if you're looking for the truth, there's characterizations of certain outlets. And some people, if they want to do what's known as, in English, front-facing, if you want to get information that's really inconvenient out, you create an outlet that is known for cranks. Let's say Alex Jones, right? And then you put some of the information will be completely bonkers. And then you'll flow certain information into those channels that are totally accurate and possibly classified. So that if anybody else who has, a little bit better comprehension of the world ever sees it, they go, oh, that's a bunch of crap from parentheses, bracket, insert outlet you've been told not to like.
InfoWars or whoever, yeah.
Or whoever. Actually, on InfoWars, have you ever seen a video from July 25th, 2001 from a guy named Alex Jones in Texas?
Probably not. Nope, I don't recall.
Oh, you really should. He put out a show about how the government was oppressing America, and boy, they had a terrorist attack in mind.
Oh, in July.
July 25th, 6 weeks before 9/11, he says, and we know, look, you call them and you tell them to call off the attack. Because we know what they're going to do. They're going to dig out some boogeyman. Some boogeyman like CIA asset Osama bin Laden.
Did he really?
Oh, yeah.
He named him?
Oh, yeah, man.
Oh. I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and he says, and they're going to do something like, it's going to be a false flag attack. They're going to like use planes and run them into buildings or something. And they're going to blame one of their assets when it's really them. And you call the White House switchboard right now. Call them right now and say, we're not going to buy it. This new world order where you're going to excuse all these wars that go off after that. Now, whatever you think about Alex Jones, when you watch that video with all you know now, you should get a chill run through you.
Right.
And and he is an associate of Roger Stone. Of course, the notorious, what do they call him? Dirty trickster, or as I call him, hostile foreign intelligence asset, or agent, or officer, depending. Not sure. He's like Osama bin Laden, who's been a CIA asset for years. Well, that appears to have been true, much in the way that Saddam Hussein had been an asset of the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, we play a lot of sides of a lot of different games, right? But you go, wow. So if something comes out in that outlet, it's tainted. And then he was the first one across the line with a 9/11 was an inside job t-shirt. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff in that information marketplace about how the Jews did it, or Israel did it, or that is very inflammatory. Wait a minute, we're not going to tolerate that kind of narrative here. And in many cases, in fact, in the vast majority of cases, you should not. But what's interesting about this is when you start to see the timing of these things over a great number of events, over a great number of subjects, you go, there's a lot of coordination here. Or it appears to be so, but, hard to assess directly without tracing, intercepted communications and money flows and whatnot, which is what our intelligence services do. But there are narratives. There are official narratives that are, set through what used to be called, television. And of course, we're on a version of television here that are monopolized by certain corporate, cash flow capital structures, right? And you've got NBC, you've got ABC Disney, you've got NBC Universal, very, very big companies that are involved in and have a lot of money to produce content, but there's a lot of people that produce content. And, what I find as an intelligence analyst is that I have to go out and then some of my colleagues who've taught me this, they're like, you really have to overcome your biases on what's crazy and what's not and look at that which you would otherwise find repellent. Like, for example, a lot of my intelligence colleagues who, tend to be liberal. Many are not as well. And the most of them are neither here nor there. But there's a bunch of folks that I know who are, into following these narratives that might consider themselves liberal, and they find the Trump era repellent or this or that. The best of those colleagues, though, are also scanning what they would consider right-wing media to go, oh, I know from my work that that's correct. Interesting that it's only showing up here. And it's only when you get this, you start taking in all these different eras, or sorry, all these different outlets, all these different groupings of, or I don't know, how would you call it, a spectrum? Because I don't, left and right doesn't cover it for me anymore.
No. And so there again, that's an official narrative of left and right that allows media to occupy certain territory that is safe for them to occupy. And I think, so just to kind of come back here for a second to the willingness to hear things you disagree with, contrarianism, if you want to call it, that I'm not passionate about my observations. And I say that knowing that is probably not entirely true. There are probably things that piss me off or get me excited or, make me happy. And I'm just not honest with myself about those emotions. But as much as possible, I need to dispassionately assess what is actually happening, as opposed to be intoxicated by the emotions that are conveyed in the messages that I'm taking in. And by the way, we take in more messages today than we ever have. And when the metaverse means that you put on a headset to go to work in the morning, you're about to take in a whole lot more messages. Those messages are very carefully crafted to make you feel and not make you think. That's, I think, the narrative industrial complex, the neurochemistry underneath the narrative industrial complex is, I need to produce a predictable emotion in somebody like you. And it's guys and gals like us who we don't necessarily respond that way. When I heard the narrative shots in arms, you may remember about a year ago, that was the description of the vaccine strategy. We got to get shots in arms. I was emotional about hearing that. I'm like, wait a second, I'm just an arm to you. I'm not a human being, and it's a shot in the arm strategy. That's your mono strategy. The mono strategy is shots in arms. Okay, well, maybe let's wait and see how that whole thing turns out, because that makes me skeptical. That triggered my skeptic to start asking questions. And that
can I intervene? Can I intervene real quick? Because I'm talking about the left-right divide, and there are two groups of people that I have noticed who are skeptical about the narrative around COVID-19 vaccines.
Yep. People
who are supposedly on the right wing, and my intelligence colleagues and my intelligence clients.
Yeah.
It's like there is there's a lot of the narrative is very different on the right, and it says you should have a lot of questions about Anthony Fauci's role, and you should have some questions about the efficacy of this. And on the left, it's like, no, you should not. And talking about being dispassionate, I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm like, all right, let's see some data here, and I think it's pretty obvious that places where people have gotten vaccines from the data that's available to me, there's less transmission of this disease. From what I hear, though, a lot of I'm frustrated by the lack of information that I am able to get from a variety of sources. And on the right wing, there's just a lot of emotion. And then I go again to my colleagues in Intel and the consumers of product who appreciate the skepticism. And there's just a lot of, I'm not sure. And there's not a lot of room for, I'm not sure. There hasn't been room for that. And like, I'm very quiet about like, I got questions.
Yep.
And that thing, and I hope everyone notices I'm not casting aspersions on anybody that's saying get vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. I got a booster shot coming up, right? But there needs to be a place where you can have some questions here. And anytime you get hustled into, anytime you get hustled into one position or another by somebody, there's a narrative industrial complex going on there.
Yeah, that word hustle is a really, really apt description, because that's what it felt like. I put one hand on my wallet when stuff like that starts happening to make sure I know where it is, because I'm about to get rolled, is what that feels like. Speaking of someone who's been rolled, that's what the hustle feels like, and it triggers in me my skeptical mind, and I get really analytical about stuff. And so about a year ago, when the vaccines first started rolling, there were a few voices out there saying, is this the right thing for everyone? Do we need to vaccinate every individual in our society in order for us to get back to normal? Remember that? Getting back to normal became the description of the reason why you need to vaccinate everyone.
On both the left and the right sides, no doubt.
No doubt. By the way, if Donald Trump had won the election, I think the mandate would be much more severe, because that's how you salvage the economy. The only way to salvage the economy.
Hold on. Say that again for the people in the back. If Donald Trump had won, you think we would have had more of a vaccine mandate?
For sure. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind, because that is you have to get back to normal, right? We got to get things back to normal. Greatest economy the America's ever known, all of that stuff.
And he's starting to say it he's been thrown off of Twitter, but he's been starting to say that. Did you know that? Yeah.
I saw Operation Warp Speed was his doing. The whole idea was, we're gonna Operation Warp Speed. The three most narratively misleading words in the pandemic, probably. So here's the thing is, I started listening to people who were skeptical and who had reputations that had not yet been destroyed. There's a gentleman in Holland named Geert Vanden Bossche who became a real source of caution on this. And of course, he's been completely slandered 9 ways to Sunday, and he carries on. But believe it or not, Geert Vanden Bossche, I think he was the head of vaccinology research for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And no less a voice than Dr. Vanden Bossche came out and said, I'd like to remind you of what happens with mass vaccination when you vaccinate everyone with a leaky vaccine. Now, this is the words of vaccinologists, not the words of the history undergrad here. The vaccinologist who used to be in charge of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's vaccinology program, and they spent billions of dollars vaccinating people all around the world. This guy is not an anti-vaxxer. He's a vaccinologist. And he's
literally a vaxxer. More than anybody else. He's a vaxxer.
He's the biggest vaxxer in Europe, basically. And an evolutionary biologist. He talked about something called Marek's disease, M-A-R-E-K, apostrophe S. Marek's disease is I think it's a hemorrhagic virus in chickens, poultry. And there was a vaccine that came out some years ago. I don't know exactly when. For Marek's disease, and they did a mass vaccination campaign in the poultry population in several countries. I can't recall where, but because the vaccine was leaky, quote unquote, it allowed the transmission and infection of the virus to continue, and the virus evolved just like we have evolution in bacteria based on the overuse of antibiotics.
Survival of the fittest, man.
And
you get to, yeah.
So his observation most recently with the Omicron variant from 6 weeks ago or so was that the 32 mutations in the receptor binding domain of Omicron indicate that the leaky vaccine is doing what it would be expected to be doing, which is if spike protein is the principal mechanism of action that you're vaccinating against and boosting against, by the way, then a leaky vaccine will only allow transmission that avoids spike as the principal mechanism of transmission. So, I mean, at that point, when he invoked Marek's disease, and I went out and looked it up, and I'm like, holy shit, we're breeding a super bug that's going to be super hot. Well, let's just put and it's not that vaccines are wrong for everybody, by the way. If you are an 80-year-old diabetic and you're overweight and you live in the nursing home, you damn better get vaccinated. There's no question about it. But if you're a 5-year-old child who won't even know you're sick, it's probably a bad idea. And the risk outweighs the benefit to that individual. And by the way, medical ethics does not dictate that 5-year-old needs to be vaccinated to see their 80-year-old diabetic grandmother in the nursing home at Christmas time. That is not an ethical medical decision. That is unethical for you to force a medical treatment on someone in order to protect someone else. That is bad.
Now, note how early some of this anti-vax sentiment came out, and there's been some analysis that's been made unclassified about it was the Russian Federation's intelligence services that were pushing anti-vax stuff on the internet, not for COVID, but for like everything going back to 2008 and 9, pushing that out on
MMR,
chat board.
Scott,
I mean, I had
what was it was like mercury poisoning in the preservative or whatever.
That stuff, man, you don't even know. I'm like, dude, you don't even know it's an ibuprofen. You might not even know how to spell ibuprofen. Why are you getting all? And that was stuff that was had been proven out 100 years. It's very interesting that we go out. That starts around the late 2000s, and then 10 years later, right around the point when people were starting to, the Democrats got the Intelligence Committee back, chairmanship as well as the oversight, and there was going to be some reports coming out, and there were some reports that came out, and the 2019 also you had the Mueller report coming out talking about foreign interference in U.S. politics, and that fall, this virus escapes, and they say it's from Wuhan. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff from Wuhan. For example, the precursor chemicals for fentanyl that kill a whole lot of people, and many other interesting things. This thing escapes, and it didn't really hit the common narrative until about March of that year. I was hearing about it in December of 2019. And so yet 10 years of solid, you should generally be skeptical about the notion of vaccinations. And then, this thing emerges in nature. We have trouble identifying exactly how it came out. We know that the Obama administration started doing stockpiles of ventilators and PPE as a national strategic stockpile in 2010. So about a year after they came in and kind of got situated, got the banking thing under control after the housing crash, they immediately started stockpiling ventilators. Pretty interesting. And then 10 years later, we have this thing, and then we have this whole debate in public, and Trump goes in with warp speed, and something I noticed that Joe Biden said, he says America's going to be the arsenal of vaccines. Now, you said you took very, very seriously that someone's like, well, just got shots in arms. Well, is that all I am? Is an arm? Okay. But when I heard the term arsenal, I'm like, oh, that's a Department of Defense. Now, what's very interesting is Walter Reed Medical Center, I believe, I just reported that they have a vaccine that does like 24 of these spike proteiny things. That's a French major talking. So, but it's very different than what the private sector has created so far. And they said it's only phase 1, but we're going really fast. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. Now, Walter Reed fought infectious disease in the Army. That's why it's the hospital system is named after him. So that's all very interesting. And it sounds like the new vaccine coming out from Walter Reed, coming out from the Department of Defense, which will not have intellectual property owned by anybody else with a profit motive. It's paid for by our taxes. It sounds like it's materially different and possibly quite a bit more effective and might be less leaky, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But think of the last year and a half of narrative. And I want to send a shout out to, actually, I'm not going to name where they go to school, but, when my kiddos go to school, there's a superintendent that has done an amazing job of balancing the politics and the medicine and the science and what he's got to do. I mean, I think these people are damn near, miraculous in how they've balanced all this. And, running a school is hard anyhow, right? And these guys that have, I think, 22 schools in their district. And, I think, wow, I actually take these people to be pretty conservative. And a lot of my neighbors here in the part of St. Louis I live, pretty conservative. And they've managed to split all the differences. And as you know, I can be kind of critical of some local, institutions around here. But here they've just done an amazing job as far as I'm concerned. Because what's been put before us has been, an impossible task. How do you balance all the narratives that people are getting when there's the narrative industrial complex, and you add that Facebook stuff to that, where they're measuring what they think you want to hear, what you are liking currently, your current mental state, your current emotional state, and then they feed you from that. Whew. And, if you know Russian military science, which I'm not saying the Russians are behind this, but if you know that science and you learn from it and you're doing, your narrative creation based on that, you're going to want to fracture as many people into as many different, narratives as possible. And I think as Intel people, I don't know if you ever go through the old CIA databases. Easy for me to say, the databases. The archives, I guess I should say, where they have PDF files of the old presidential daily briefs. And there's just it's gotten all the chops, and it's like, here's what's happening in Vietnam. Here's what's happening in Ukraine. Here's what's happening in Argentina. Boom, 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 boom. And the narrative for the president every day is clarified. Here's what's up. Here's what to look at here, and the rest we're leaving alone.
Yeah.
When I think of all these fractured narratives, and some of which are they're just created with such care, of you've got to believe this and you got to feel this way about it. It's an assault on your freedom. It's an assault on your health, and it's an assault on your children. It's an assault. And then, I think you need the intel people to go, all right, so what's up with that? So is the vaccine leaky? Do we have a new one coming? When's that going to be ready? Very calm. Boop, boop, boop.
Yeah.
I like to think that that's where our tribe exists here, is that we don't get emotional about any of the narratives, not even our own, because we've all been hustled. We've all, all of our stuff is wrong to a certain degree, right?
Well, that's actually really an important point. Is intelligence analysts use the word estimate. Because the estimate is wrong. And we're narrowing its degree of wrongness such that we can be more confident in our findings and in our insights, and ultimately be actionable. That's, I think, sort of the thing that we haven't said yet is, how do I act? How would I act on this? What would I do about this? And it also has to be taken from the perspective of the actor. How am I going to project power into my macro environment based on the things I can control? And by the way, I'd like to make stoicism great again here in America, because that's ultimately what we need to do in order to diffuse this cortisol-inducing neurochemistry, otherwise known as the media, social and mainstream alike. And I think, by not giving two shits what those narratives are, and instead doing our own research. And I think it was the New York Times, this was a few months ago, actually said that doing your own research is a dangerous practice because you can be manipulated by people who want you to behave in a certain way. And I thought to myself, hang on a second, aren't they the, freedom dies in darkness people? Or is that the Washington Post I'm thinking of? The point being, we are all critical thinkers. And I think that was actually what they were calling into question was, don't be a critical thinker. You've got to get on the bus and get on board. Get in the boxcar, as the other analogy would be, or else we're never going to get back to normal. We finally got a Democrat in the White House.
Back to normal.
Right. We got to get back to normal, people. And the only way to do that is to vaccinate every man, woman,
gotta get back to normal
in every cat house, whore house, and outhouse across the country. There's only one way. There's only one way. And that narrative is wrong. That is false. And in fact, it's not even good medicine.
So, it's 9:27 here. Can we just do some freewheeling stuff on some political narratives here?
Sure.
So one of the most distasteful things that happened to me in the calling out the Russians on doing things that Russia does and has done for 100 years is like, he's a liberal activist, or he's an establishment Democrat. I'm like, I am a spook American and proud of it, and do not. I just hated that being put on me. But so we got to get back to normal, and we all know if we just get somebody that has a D after their name, everything will be okay. And we just don't know what's wrong with Joe Manchin in West Virginia. It's like, I don't know, maybe you could look into the Russians buying up them coal companies and then sell them back for twice the price to the people. Some people call that a bribe, but anyhow, you go on with your emotional fit that you're having here. But everyone's like, George W. Bush came in 2000, and that election was so close. And if Al Gore had just won, things would have been totally different. Like Al Gore. So who is his vice president for ZTE, the Chinese tech company that is sanctioned, and he didn't file under FARA? Yeah. And he held a top secret clearance because he was a senator, and you get one automatically for that. Okay, there was that guy. Also, it wasn't Al Gore. Wait a minute. Who Al Gore Sr., didn't he work with like Soviet agent Armand Hammer to work with Muammar Gaddafi to open up the Libyan oil fields? Right? And, Gaddafi was not being handled by the KGB. It was the Czech STB, as we all know. And didn't Al Gore Jr. work with Chernomyrdin during the Yeltsin days? And it was all about reset, and the CIA would send him reports, and he would write back what was described as a barnyard epithet on them and send them back to Langley. And everyone's like, if it had only been Al Gore. You mean Al Gore, who sold his TV network to Qatar and oil emirate, a fossil fuel economy? He made what, $500 million off that, and then went on his tour about global warming. If only the dude who took $500 million from Qatar and the agent, the unregistered foreign agent for Chinese spy tech, if only they had been president in 2000, all of this would have been avoided. Really, I think you're missing some parts in your narrative. That's all. And I think so. I don't know. It's
Well, I spent 4
thoughts.
years. I spent 4 years at UW-Madison getting a degree in political science, and it only taught me one thing, and that is politics makes you dumb. And if you get political, you are willfully making yourself dumber. I think we invented a word the other day. You're indemnifying yourself
You're
by
indemnifying yourself.
getting political. And that there's nothing more emotional than party politics, frankly. Well, politics in general, but party politics in particular, because partisans are partisan because they're loyal. They have loyalties to a platform, and that platform is clearly superior to the other party's platform. And partisanism allows you to do really, really shockingly awful things to each other. I love one of the political trends of the last 20 years, which is the rise of the political independent and the broad middle that really is repelled by anyone saying they're a public servant and then proceeding to make many, many, many millions of dollars in public service. That I've always been, curious about how that works, exactly. How is it that someone who wasn't a millionaire when they were elected is now a multimillionaire as a public servant? And it happens a shockingly large number of times. It's almost like it's set up that way. It's almost as if, that's the way the system works. So for those of us who are apolitical or even anti-political, I would call myself anti-partisan is probably a better way of saying it. The real dichotomy is not left and right. The real dichotomy is authoritarian and free. And I used to call myself a libertarian with a small L because I wasn't much of a joiner as a Gen Xer. But I would actually describe myself as a constitutional anarchist these days, because there is a really great document known as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that help to calibrate that Constitution for discoveries and negotiations that happened after that. That is the limit on government power. And I say that very intentionally because that's what the Constitution is there for. The Constitution is there to limit the government's power to govern us. And as someone who finds most government work counterproductive, and I would even say bureaucracy between bureaucracy and legislation, we have created the gridlock that we enjoy today. And I say enjoy because it is a check on change. There is my conservative side, and I do have a conservative side. I have a liberal side though too, and it's actually incorrect to label someone that way. The conservative part of me sees that there are things that should be preserved. The liberal part of me sees that there are things that have to change. But I'm a realist. I'm a realist and a pragmatist about what is likely to change and is changeable, and what things are fundamentally preservable. What things can we keep and should we keep? So, the topic of gay marriage a few years ago was one thing that was used to polarize, because there's a very vehement wing of conservatism that is absolutely against that equal right. And there is a very vehement wing of, the liberal side who used that to define the inequality argument. And they're not wrong, by the way. That's not incorrect. So we're used through these narratives, we are used to divide us. And there was an analogy recently during the pandemic around what happens when you have an ant farm full of black ants and you put a red ant in there. Well, if something goes wrong, who do they blame? The person who put the red ant in, or the red ant? They kill the red ant because the red ant has disrupted the ant farm. And that's probably a strained analogy, but that's what happens with the narrative industrial complex. And I think you agree, is that they create a scapegoat, and that scapegoat is the one who must be blamed. And with this current situation, it's the anti-vaxxers. They're the scapegoats who will be blamed.
Well, and that's not a term I like, but it's the one they use because, as you pointed out, there's I hadn't heard about the chap in the Netherlands who worked for, was it Bill and Melinda Gates, who are the second biggest donors to the World Health Organization, and the WHO has been a little dodgy, on its on some of its analysis, and been left some stuff out. But there's a chap up in Edmonton who's a scientist who does a YouTube show that he just very calmly, well, this is this and that's that, and it's not the same as the purified, already distilled, spit into your mouth narrative that is coming out elsewhere. And I think that's the thing that I want to change, and not just about the COVID-19 thing, which may possibly have been a bioweapon or a long-term plan or whatever. I mean, there's probably a lot of classified stuff in there that we're just not going to get a good narrative because some stuff is going to have to be declassified. There's a lot of stuff like that in the world, right? But in fact, that's maybe too recent and too intense an example. We can go to climate change. We can go to transsexual issues or whatever. All these arguments are just so hot, and there's just so much more to be learned by cooling the temperature off and getting the data. Get me trend data. Get me information. We're all being punched in the amygdala constantly by the narrative industrial complex.
I love that.
You gotta feel. I just figured I got one coming here. The narrative industrial complex makes you feel something before you even think something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just came up with that, and after 47 years, they're there to make sure that you already have. You have neurotransmitters going off before you've even seen the frickin' raw data on a spreadsheet.
Right.
Because one of the examples I used to use in my future intelligence course that I would give at Skip and other professional organizations, I have this big image up of a shark. And I think I was going back to Fox News and some other outlets from the year, I think 2002, where they're like, it's a summer of hell for vacation goers because there's been this many shark attacks. And shark attacks that year were down about 3%.
Right.
And shark attacks are extraordinarily rare. And if you're going to take a century-long view of the absolute number of shark attacks, then you have to look at the automobile and the ability to get to a shore. Anywhere near a shark, because people in Kansas in 1880 had very, very limited risk of shark attack.
Right.
So if a person from Kansas today has money to fly to Florida, then their risk of shark attack has gone through the goddamn roof, and then the government won't do anything about it.
Exactly.
So I had the slide up, and I was like, then I would throw up the data, like, there were 36 shark attacks. 34 of them were on professional surfers, or something like that. I mean, but the news was there going, like, as if people weren't scared enough in the year after 9/11. They're like, you'll also be murdered on vacation by sharks in Nebraska. I mean, like, they wanted you to feel something before they wanted you to think anything. And there was no news there at all. And in fact, it wasn't just a hyperventilation about there's been an increase in this or that, because you know what? Shark attacks have gone up in the last century per capita because more people can get their asses from Indiana to California
where the sharks are. So
yes, over the century, the data shows that shark attacks menace more Americans. Yes, moron, that's true. But why are you telling me that story? Why are you telling people from Indiana that story? And you're missing some context. And there's just so much like that out there. And I don't know what the answer is. Should we write some legislation that puts an intelligence analyst on for 5 minutes after every single news broadcast? I mean, I think that would be cool. I don't know if it's feasible, but what do you think?
Well, I love the idea. I love the idea that just don't get so excited, everybody. That's the thing that I think the narrative industrial complex is counting on. It's counting on everybody losing their damn minds and then, pointing fingers. And I think that part of the problem is what intelligence analysts are for. What intelligence analysts are for is to listen and then say, well, what was really proven in that message? And then what do the other guys say? And then the truth is in there somewhere. But boy, I detected that the counter argument was trying to hide this piece of data that the argument was also trying to hide. So why are they both hiding that? Why is there obfuscation, deliberate obfuscation of reality? I should probably investigate there. That's actually a principle that I discovered last summer when this show started, summer 2020. I guess it's not last summer, it's the summer before, is that when you see paradox or conflict in messaging, that's like X marks the spot for us. When there's a paradox, dig here, because that paradox, there's gold in them there hills, and there's truth underneath there.
So this is a good takeaway message for the audience about the narrative industrial complex. When whatever they're focused on is for a reason. There's probably a bunch of gold under them hills,
right?
Because why? And the narrative. This is not just a news story here or there. Because my work is, when I'm doing, what we call secondary research in the competitive intelligence world, getting stuff that's published. My eagle eye is on little tiny stories that no one else knows what they mean. They're not classified. They're out there. There's an asymmetry of analysis more than there is of information. So it's like, you saw it too, you just didn't know what it meant. That's part of our value proposition here. But anytime you see, so that's where we create value from stuff that nobody's making a big deal about, but that's a big deal. But anytime you see somebody make a big deal and there's 3-4 alternate, really emotional, narratives, don't just keep your hand in your wallet to keep your money. Maybe keep your hand in your wallet because maybe there's money under that narrative because somebody is spending a whole lot of cash to create a story.
So my only regret from the pandemic, and I'll say the opportunity the pandemic presented in that vein, is that I didn't buy a container load of ivermectin from Pakistan and just have it shipped here in March. And the reason I didn't become the world's largest ivermectin smuggler is notwithstanding. But I'll say this about it. There are two new antiviral medications that are being introduced, which act as protease inhibitors. They cut open the protease chain of the COVID-19 replication mechanism, and they make it less of it makes it a lot tougher for replication of SARS-CoV-2 to happen. And the first of those was called molnupiravir, which came to market by Merck just a few months ago. The second one is just been fast-tracked by the FDA, called Paxlovid by Pfizer. In the skeptic, I'll call them the anti-vaxxer community, they are known as ivermectin and Pfizer-mectin, ironically, because the mechanism of action is nearly identical to the principal mechanism of action of ivermectin. By the way, 2015 was a big year in medical science because in 2015, the people who discovered and commercialized ivermectin as anti-parasitic and antiviral. It's also an antifungal. It has anti-carcinogenic properties. It does a whole lot of things. They won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for virtually eliminating river blindness from Africa as a result of treating with ivermectin. There's a plaque at Merck which commemorates the Nobel Prize in medicine because Merck brought the molecule to market in the 1980s. There were 4.5 billion doses in man before the pandemic ever happened. And how was ivermectin presented to the public?
Veterinary.
Horse paste.
Exactly. I saw that exact same thing, and I was like,
Yes. So that whole world of disinformation and misinformation. My wife and I noticed that there was someone in the hospital recently, about my age, early 50s, who was failing, had COVID, probably Delta, and passed away, unfortunately, a couple days ago. And about a week ago, when we sort of realized that, our conversation was, how do we get him ivermectin? Because I'm sure they're not treating with that at the particular medical facility they were treating him at. Now, I don't know whether or not they were or not. I don't know anything about it. But I will tell you that if the narrative ultimately falls apart on the greatest experiment in medical history, known as the vaccine monostrategy, and nothing else, that is the only way out of this, right? Back to normal. Got to get back to normal, and that's the only way. There's going to be hell to pay across our entire culture and civilization. I hope there is, anyway, if the truth comes out.
Well, the truth never comes out. There's just more information that comes out, maybe from different perspectives. The truth being unknowable because it needs to be observed from all sorts of different perspectives. We can't all occupy. At the same time, but something one way or the other. I wear a mask at the grocery store because it's easy to do so. Yep. But aside from that, I have a feeling there's so much going on in geopolitics here, and there's been so many actions taken by some different political actors that I go, well, to be dispassionate about it is like, I don't know. Something's going on here, and I have a feeling, I wonder if that won't be quite shocking. Because it seems like this is one, since it's involved so many people, that there's going to need to be, it would be very useful if there was some clarity here. Mm-hmm. There ain't much clarity here, and, right. Some things can make more sense to you later when, like I say, sometimes things have to be declassified. Because they're in the national security space. But if this human health is part of the national security space and we can't learn about it, then that almost suggests a biowarfare element to this. I mean, there's a lot to learn here, and I'm not able to bring forth any classified information right now. So I think to conclude on the narrative industrial complex, we will go back, literally right now, it's a work day. We're going to go back to work doing what we do best, getting some information and going, what's that? So what if, what else? That's the job of Intel, right?
What a great way to close things off today. So thank you, my man. I love you. And I'm so
love you, bro.
So pleased to start the new year here with you. Kathy Gray has allowed us, has alerted us that
is she riding shotgun again?
She's on YouTube, and she said our feed and links switched to a dating video in the middle of the show. So that there's a
maybe this is a dating video.
It kind of is, yeah. Kathy, I super appreciate that heads up, because this experiment, as we sort of soft
in the middle of the show,
go figure. I have no idea why, but I have engineers who can go figure that out. So I now have a mission for the day is to figure out who hacked our YouTube stream and flip it over to hijacked it to some dating video. So, Kathy, thank you very much for that heads up.
And if somebody ended up getting laid because of us, and it's been an even better show.
They owe us a nickel, at least. As a thanks. So thank you, my man. I will talk to you tomorrow. You good to talk tomorrow?
In the by and by. Tomorrow.
All right, my man. Have a good rest of your day.